You're listening to My Inner Teacher with Peter Starius and Crystal Ariel. The answers you seek are within you.
So,
Hi, Crystal.
Nicki, it's a pleasure
Hi.
having you. Like, I think if I try and remember, the only time I get to see you is at the Telluride Yoga Festival.
Oh, God.
It seems
Yeah.
like that's the only time we connect. And
That is not good.
well, it's
There we go.
just
There
every
we go.
time I do connect at Telluride, I just think, God, if she was my neighbor, we'd be hanging out.
I know. Are you back? Are you back in
San Luis Obispo?
San Luis Obispo?
We are. We came back from New Zealand a couple years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah. I
And
saw you guys when you were on your way, and yes, it was in Telluride.
yeah, the New Zealand experience was powerful, especially considering
COVID, right?
what the world was going through.
Yeah.
Um, and it gave my daughter an opportunity to go to a school without masks, and
Oh, well, how refreshing.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting. My daughter was not happy. Teenager, 15-year-old going to New Zealand, leaving all her friends. She was not happy. And so she's really smart. Like, she did her research of what kind of schools are in New Zealand, and she saw all these girls' schools where they have to wear uniforms. And she goes, Dad, I'll go, but I'm not going to an all girls school, and I'm not wearing a uniform. Like, that's.
There you go.
However, when we get to New Zealand, the first girl that she meets her age goes to an all-girls school that wears uniform, and she's feeling bonding with this girl who's the granddaughter of our friends. And then the next thing you know, she's going. And when we left New Zealand to come
Yeah.
back, she was sad because
Aw.
she really bonded in that all-girl environment. And she also loved the fact that her class starts at 8:30 in the morning. She could wake up. she could wake up at 8:15, no makeup, just throw on her uniform, and was at class. And then we're just a couple blocks away from school. Here, back in the States, I mean, she has to get up an hour and a half early just to get ready for school, and she's not a
Oh, my
morning
God.
person, so that's not happiness.
Yeah. Well, honestly, that's always been my least favorite thing about yoga. I'm like, why is it so early in the morning? I was never much of a morning person, but we have to train ourselves. I remember when my daughter Maya, who's now 26, which is crazy, was when YouTube was just kind of starting, and she would be up at she was in 7th grade. She'd be up watching YouTube tutorials for how to do her hair and her makeup. And she'd be up and out. We had to leave at 7 o'clock from here because they went to the Waldorf school that was like a 45-minute drive. And, I'd stumble down to wake up Mateo, and Maya would already be in there straightening her hair and doing her whole thing. And yeah, that's just kind of who she is, which is funny. She probably would have done that if she went to an all-girls school too. But
right.
Anyway, yeah. So how old is your daughter now?
She's 17. And, she talks about going back to New Zealand for university. And I think it'd be a good move.
Yeah.
It would be more of an excuse for me to spend more time back in New Zealand. But
Yeah.
right now, our life is, pretty basic. Go to school. My wife's in school, so I'm doing the cooking for breakfast and lunch.
Oh, you're the householder.
I am the householder, and
Yeah.
and somehow I've been able to squeeze this podcast in before I go
Well,
off to
well
eat.
done.
I know it's been
Yeah.
it actually has been an incredible process.
Yeah, I bet. I've thought about doing that for years. I even bought the microphone, did the whole thing, and of course I have yet to do it. So I'm inspired that you've actually created it. Well done.
Well, I didn't create it. That's what's
Oh.
awesome.
Oh,
is
even better. You got help? Clearly.
These magical Mexican people reach out to me.
What?
And it's a cartel.
Magical
It's a tech
What?
marketing
I'm not even
cartel.
Mexican.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, are you in Mexico, Crystal? Like, what is
Yeah.
happening here? Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, she
Yes.
lives in Mexico.
Oh, how awesome. Well, then we have similar scenery.
Yes. So anyway, it's all come together magically. And what I was going to say is I was excited about this episode with you just so you and I could have a conversation that passing and going in Telluride never seems to allow much depth.
I know,
And
one dinner with kids and people and blah blah
exactly,
blah. So
exactly.
I know, and I've wanted to go back to Telluride. They've invited me, but I often do a retreat in Europe in June, and the timing just hasn't worked. So, and then I was teaching at Jess's studio. One of my students opened one called Practice, and she's closing at the end of the month. I mean, there's a lot of studios that, COVID and I don't know, just things these days. It's hard for people to keep a brick and mortar studio going. Don't you
Yeah,
think? Have you noticed that?
yeah, of course. It's greedy landlords number one. I think the number one
Unbelievable.
reason is greedy landlords because it's hard to find, affordable places to do yoga that are fashion, that are in neighborhoods. Like I can go out in the industrial section of town and get
Yeah.
a old, auto body garage for affordable rent, but
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Nobody's coming.
No one's coming.
I
So,
don't know. Look what happened to Wynwood in Miami. Could turn into a thing. That whole industrial warehouse.
no,
And gentrified.
it's so hard. I mean, the only reason that my studios were successful in California, my first studio was in a building that had an upstairs that was condemned by the building department because of a leaky roof. And the landlord, this was no yoga studio in San Luis Obispo at the time. The landlord was kind of this typical landlord, like, this guy's, I can make a buck off him. Maybe if I offer him cheap rent. So I, as an architect, I knew I could probably throw some tar up on the roof and it'd stop the leaks and at least be able to have a yoga studio. And it was an old Oddfellows dance hall, so it had big high
Oh my
ceilings
God.
and
Cool.
that old hardwood maple floors under like a half an inch of dust. And because it hadn't been occupied in 12 years,
Whoa.
it was the perfect space for our first yoga center, and the rent was $100 a month
Nuh-uh.
for 2,500 square feet.
What?
Wow.
What year was that?
Yeah, for real.
Let's see, 3 or 94.
Damn. $100 a month.
Well, he felt sorry for me because
Yeah.
he said, well, so what kind of business are you going to put up there? And I go, yoga. And he goes, oh, yeah. I tell you what, here's how he sweetened the deal. Because he knew I'd be out. He thought I was going to be out of business in a year. I'll give you the first 3 months rent free. The first 3 months you're free. And then after that, it'll be $100 until the end of the first year. And then at the end of the first year, we'll go to market rents. So that first year was practically, that was the best income I ever made running a yoga center because when we opened classes, it was the only yoga center in town. I just spent a year in India. Everyone wanted to study with someone who'd actually been in India.
Yeah.
And it was packed. And, I think Eddie came, that guy that
Might
you
have.
used to know well, and
My
now you still
ex-husband,
know.
that
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it these days.
Oh yeah.
look at that.
No,
Anyway,
he's my former husband
Yeah,
has
I
that
love
one.
that
Somebody
better.
said I like
Yeah,
that.
the former husband.
Former. Because he's still in my life.
Of
He's a
course.
pain, but I love him.
Of course. Anyway, so yeah, it was fantastic. But nowadays, it's super hard. I want to pivot here. I want to pivot to you.
Okay.
You had this background, the little bit of research that I've done. What was the motivation for you to go to yoga the very first time?
Well, the very first yoga class I went to, well, I'll back it up a little. So I grew up with fairly conservative parents. My dad worked for the State Department, so Foreign Service. So I grew up living overseas in different countries. And my mom thought it would be important that we go to high school in the States. So she got my dad to get a posting in D.C., and my brother's just a year behind me. So the longest as a Foreign Service officer you can stay in the U.S. is 5 years. So it got me through high school and my brother, who was a year behind me. So we lived in McLean, Virginia, which is right outside of D.C. And I started school there. And we had just been living in Moscow in Russia. Yeah, and so I came back, and this was like 1984. It was like Cold War. Everyone's calling me a commie. I was like, oh my God, I hate this place. Why are we living? America sucks. And then I took a journalism class at the beginning of my sophomore year. And this guy in my class was like, hey, do you like music? And I'm like, I guess. And he was like, here. And he handed me a cassette, Skeletons from the Closet, basically the best of the Grateful Dead. And I was like, what is this? And I loved it. I was like, oh my God. And then he took me to a Dead show a couple of months later. And anyway, I became like a total hippie. I was like, oh my God, I had never been exposed to alternative things. So that going to Dead shows like got me traveling, got me exposed to a whole different community of people that I didn't even know existed. And honestly, the first place I ever saw people practice yoga was at a Grateful Dead show. So, and vegetarianism, my favorite food was a hamburger. I had never heard of vegetarianism. So I saw that. So I equated those two things with like being a hippie and with the Grateful Dead. And so then I went to university in Massachusetts in Amherst at UMass, and they offered yoga for gym credit. And you had to take 3 gym credits to graduate. And this is in the late 80s. And they actually had Hatha yoga, Kundalini yoga, and Iyengar yoga, which was pretty unheard of at the time. So my freshman year, I found all that out in the first semester. So I signed up for Hatha yoga. I didn't know one from the other. It was just like, okay, I'll take that one. And I remember it was January, so it was the second semester. And again, I got my schedule over the break, and I looked at the time for yoga, and it started at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, what? I'm like, that does not sound good. And I was like, I got to set an alarm. The gym is on the other side of the campus. And I remember getting up that morning and thinking, man, this better be good. And I went. It's cold. It's the end of January. And man, I walked in, I took that class, and it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. The feeling I've always described from that experience was that it felt incredibly familiar to me. It felt like I was putting on really comfortable shoes, or boots that are like broken in, they're yours. That's why it's always so funny to me when people leave yoga classes with other people's shoes. It's like, I'm like, don't you know what your shoes feel like? It's just funny. But that was it, and that was Hatha yoga. And I was so lit up. I didn't miss a class. It was great. I don't even remember the teacher's last name. Her name was Carolyn. I wonder if I could somehow find the record of that. That was in like 1988. So I was 18. And then I ended up taking Kundalini yoga the next year, and it was cool that there was a Kundalini ashram in the town over from Amherst, but it was a little woo woo for me at the time. It was like, they're in the turbans and the white robes and the whole thing, and they were super cool people. But the chanting, I wasn't really ready for that stuff. The breath of fire, and we did this like overnight retreat with them, silent. That was so hard. I never did anything like that. Up at 4 a.m., taking a cold shower, the gong, the whole thing. I was like, okay, this might be a little too much for me. Well, and then this is a crazy thing. There was one class left, right? It was Iyengar yoga. So I'm in my dorm with my friends, and we're picking our classes for the next semester. And I was like, I think I'm going to take this Iyengar, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Iyengar yoga class. And one of my girlfriends was like, oh no, don't take that class. Like, that teacher is so mean. You don't want that guy. He's just super intense. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't sound fun. I'm going to go swimming. Anyway, the teacher of that class was Eddie Modestini. Yeah. Yeah. That's my ex-husband, former husband. Yeah. So crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So crazy. So fast forward till my last year of college, and I was living off campus with, in a house with a group of girls. And one of the girls, who's still a friend of mine today, she was taking a yoga class, and it was Eddie's class. And I was like, oh, I heard that guy's like really mean. And she was like, no, it's really great. And he had just met Tim Miller, within the last year, and switched his whole reality and basically taught the primary series. He was teaching Ashtanga yoga. I didn't know what that was, but my girlfriend Kaylee was coming home and teaching us sun salutations, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And she's like, next semester is your last semester. Just take the class with me. And I was like, okay, what do I have to lose? This stuff's cool. So I went and, and it obviously ended up, this person was incredibly influential in my life. And, yeah, I walked in and I remember seeing Eddie at the front of the room and got this kind of crazy electrical flash. And I knew I'd have some connection with him. I never dreamed it would go as far as it did. And anyway, then I studied learned primary series, and then I graduated. And at the end of the semester, he said, you seem like you're really into the yoga. Like, you should pursue it. And I was like, well, I think I'm moving to Russia. I literally was studying Russian in college. That's what I got my degree in. Soviet and East European studies with a minor in Russian language. And I'd gone to the State Department. I had been tested for my proficiency, and I was waiting on a few jobs. And then I said, I'm driving cross country with my girlfriends. And he's like, well, if you end up in California, go check out Tim. So we did. I drove cross country with my girlfriend, who's still a great friend of mine. But it was me, her, and her boyfriend, so it was definitely like three's a crowd. And by the time we ended up in California, I was so sick of the boyfriend and her. And I was like, we got to Encinitas, and I was like, let me go to this. It was Solana Beach, actually, back then. That's where Tim was teaching, at the North County Yoga Center. Right. And then I went in, and I was like, I think I want to take class with Tim. And she said, the woman at the desk said, oh, he's not here. He went to Maui. And I'm like, oh. Okay. So I left, ended up driving up to Santa Cruz, left my friends, was staying with other friends, and then this is so crazy. Ended up connecting with Eddie. Like, he called my mom. It was just so crazy. He called my mom. Whatever happened to Nicki? And she was like, oh, she's in California. And he's like, oh, well, what is she, where? And she's like, well, she's in this is before cell phones,
Right.
everything.
That's right. You had to use your mom instead of the internet.
My mom. And I had called my mom like the day before, hadn't talked to her in like a month. Where are you? Oh my God, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, and I'm going to these dead shows. And she's like, okay. And then Eddie calls her crazy like the next day. And she's like, oh, she said she's going to a dead show. He's like, I'm in San Francisco. Like, I'm going to those dead shows, because he was a deadhead too. And he's like, I'll see her there. My mom was like, what do you mean you're going to see her there? It's like thousands of people.
Hey, quick note. Peter's Inner Teacher Academy is launching soon. If this is resonating with you, head over to innerteacheracademy.com and grab a spot on the wait list. These trainings are intimate and space is limited. So if you want to be first in line, tap the link in the description below and sign up.
You can also see details about my 2025 retreats at some incredible locations around the world, like Iceland, Austria, California, and New Zealand. Attendance at these trainings will count towards in-person hours for the Inner Teacher Academy. And now let's get back to the magic.
So he goes to the show. I didn't go to the show. I was so sick of people. It's like maybe the one time ever that I had a ticket to a concert and didn't go. I gave it to my friends because I had just been with people for months, and I was like, I'm just going to be alone in this house. I'll go tomorrow and the next night. And I called my mom back, and she's like, oh my God. She's like, this is so weird, but your yoga teacher called you and said he was going to see you at the Grateful Dead show. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't go to the show. I was like, if he calls back, give him this number. This is where I am. And he went to the show and he didn't find me. He called my mom the next day and she's like, you are not going to believe this, but she called me. This is the number where she is in Santa Cruz. And he called me and he was like, hey, I'm going back down to Encinitas. And I was like, well, I'm sick of this place. And he's like, well, come with me. And I came with him. And I went down to Encinitas. I ended up house sitting for people and cleaning the yoga studio in exchange for classes. And then him and Tim left for India. They went to study with Pattabhi Jois. And I stayed there. And Eddie came home like 3 or 4 weeks later, really sick. And he ended up getting better. He found a doctor, I don't know, some kind of parasite thing. And he was like, I'm going back. And everyone was like, you're insane. You're going back to India? And he was like, yeah. And he said, then he asked me, do you want to come? And I was like, yeah. And I called my parents and I was like, look at my passport. I still have a diplomatic passport and I had just turned 22. My dad was like, yeah, well, you can't travel on that anymore. And I was like, oh, I kind of want to leave in a week. And he was like, I'm like, can you help me out? And he goes, oh, where are you? I said, I'm like near San Diego. And he's like, oh, my friend Peter, his name was Peter, is working at the consulate in Tijuana. Can you get yourself down there? He'll hook you up with a new passport.
Wow.
So it was crazy. I borrowed somebody's car. I drove to the border, walked across, took a taxi to the consulate. My dad's friend hooked me up. I had a passport in like an hour or two. They put me in a car back to the border. Yeah. Drove to Encinitas. Then I flew up to San Francisco, saw some of my friends. It was like Jerry Garcia band was playing at the Oakland Coliseum. It was Halloween. I went and got my visa at the consulate out in whatever that Sunset region in San Francisco. And it was like the craziest whirlwind, and then 3 days later, literally, I was on a plane to India with Eddie, and we fell in love on that trip, and we were together for, 20 years. It was crazy. And then I called my dad, I'm not going to Russia. I was been in India for a month. I'm like, yeah, I'm not taking that job. My parents are like, so that was kind of a long answer, but that was.
I know what my first question for you is.
Okay, good.
What do you think about coincidence?
Obviously, I don't know if that's destiny or coincidence. It's like we either believe there's some fated, unseen force working in the universe, or we don't. But when I tell that story, I'm like, I think I kind of believe in that stuff. I mean, it was so crazy, especially no cell phones. I hadn't talked to my mom. So random, Eddie. I honestly thought I would never see the guy again in my life. It was so. Yeah, it was nuts.
So for the research in my book, because I've been using this word coincidence for so long and never really looked at the etymology of the word. And, in English, coincidence is like two crazy, just like your story, two crazy things, no way in the world are going to come together, and they come together. But the actual Latin source of the word is two things that fit perfectly together. So
I like that.
It's just like, okay, how did we morph that word into something that's so random it's unbelievable, when it actually is something that is destined.
Yeah.
And so in this process for writing the book, I started coming across other authors who had made the same observation. And I got to get the name of this author, because the quote I remember, I just don't remember who it was from, but miracles are nature unimpeded. And to me, whatever, you kind of danced around, is it God, is it fate, is it luck, is it luck?
Yeah.
But there's something inherent in nature that seems to support a process, and I don't even know what that process is for. I was about to say for the greater good, but I'm not a fan of that word greater good, because it's been kind of I don't know,
Corrupted.
Yeah, correct. Thank you.
Not to put words in your mouth, but
yeah, there's something about the mission of this podcast, my inner teacher. We're trying to find people like yourself, like someone who's had these experiences where coincidence, where breaking outside the norm. I know that situation with parents thinking you're crazy because you're going to India, because I had the same exact experience.
Oh my God, yeah.
When I told my parents I was going to India at night, however old I was. And but what we're trying to do here is give voice to people that are listening to the teacher within.
Well, it's interesting that you're talking about coincidence and inner teacher. I just got back from teaching, of course. I was in Canada, and I was talking about Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, which is like a classic. I try to reread that every couple of years. And one of the gems that I've gotten from that book is where he talks about how all human beings, we all grew up learning we have 5 senses. And he says, no, actually humans have 6, and our 6th sense is our intuition. And it's just been dulled down, right, by society, and we've been, told to not listen to that, but really all of yoga is to awaken our intuition, right, to that voice inside that does know. You have that gut feeling, that's a real thing.
It is.
So That's kind of cool that.
But it's not
that's an
scientifically backed. And that's
yeah, well,
the
neither is
issue.
prana, right? It's like, that's what I love about that book, Breath. You know, James Nestor's book. Have you read that book?
I've seen it. I haven't read it.
I actually really enjoyed it. And he used to write for, I forget, I don't know if it was Outside, some magazine. So it's written in a way that's quite readable. And, you know, he talks to tons of scientists and then there's a lot about yoga because, of course, yogis have studied breath and the science of it and the mystery of it. And that's what I've always loved about yoga, that it's a science and an art, right? That it's these two things. But it's so cool. In the book, he talks about how it just drives scientists crazy that they can't measure prana, right? It's this magical, you know, non-linear thing, but we know it from the feeling, right? It's like when we're stuffed up, when we have a cold and we can't breathe freely through our nose because prana is assimilated in the sinuses, you know, our energy is low. Like, that's how I always get people to think about it. If you're only breathing through your mouth, you're not getting prana, right? Because we believe that prana is assimilated through the sinuses, and that little bone right here, the sella turcica, it kind of looks like a, you know, like a little tiny little bone with tons of pin pricks in it. So I always think of it as the filter, right? We breathe in and the prana is just like going up into our brain. So, but it drives, it's cool. He talks about that, like really drives scientists nuts that they can't quantify it and measure it, you know, which I think is awesome.
So I love the fact that you're referring to the sixth sense, because it sets me up for this. You've heard of the seventh sense? Because there's a great book, The Seventh Sense. You haven't heard about it?
No.
Because it's in
I
my
need
book.
to.
It's our sense of humor.
Ah, well, I definitely have that.
Yeah,
I think I'm
exactly.
hilarious.
And
That's so good.
And here's,
I might have to steal that one from you. I'll give you credit. I'll give you credit.
Take it. No, don't worry about credit. But I don't see anyone else talking about it, so oh
my God, I
did
love
create the
that.
seventh sense. Now, why is that important?
I'm giving you credit.
Because and this is really amazing. The research, I have a chapter on intuition in my book, Gravity and Grace, and the woman, the scientist that is studying intuition is Belarus Naperstek, and she's
Great name.
She's some kind of social worker in Massachusetts somewhere,
Oh.
and I think she's in her 80s now, and I want to get her on this show somehow. And I
Cool.
hope any listener out there, if you know Belarus, she's in her 80s. I know she's in a speaker network. She gets gigs talking about intuition. But I can't get in touch with her. I've tried her agent, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I'm reading this and all the science that she's accumulated on intuition. And so when I came up with this idea, the sense of humor is the seventh sense, then I started finding all this research on humor. And there's a ton of research on humor. And the pleasure hormones and pleasure chemicals that our bodies produce in these states of gut-wrenching laughter. It's like when you watch something that's so funny you want to pee yourself. The
best.
It is the best. But it's just like your own pharmacy for your immune system, your endocrine system, and you're just generating this flow inside by laughing. And so when Crystal and I, you know, I think you're number 12. You're the 12th episode we've recorded. And we're going to try and launch while I'm in India. I leave on Thursday.
So exciting.
It is exciting. I just feel like this mission that we're on is to really bring to the front the sixth and seventh sense and start to support people in their own understanding of those two non-physical, because they're non-physical senses.
Yeah.
And they both are now starting to be supported by pretty solid research.
Oh my God, that is brilliant.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and actually I use humor a lot in my classes. Yeah, I mean, and I always sort of make a joke because I find that humor really helps set people at ease, you know, and I'm self-deprecating with it too, but to get people to laugh, because of course yoga is a discipline, absolutely. And I'm quite, you know, I set a lot of boundaries in class, and I'm quite, strong with the work. And I feel like tempering it with humor and getting people to lighten up a bit is so important. I mean, life is hard enough. Let's know now we're going to make yoga harder.
Right.
So less people want to do it. I mean, God, that's so great, dude. And it's in the yamas or the niyamas. It's either a parigraha or, to not
Takes things serious.
Well, no, but I mean a relationship to you and you saying this and me hearing it, to not take credit where it isn't deserved. Like, I'm giving you full credit for that one, the 7 cents. That's brilliant. I love it.
Do you know who JP Sears is?
Yes. Oh my God, he's so funny.
Do you know him?
No, I don't know him.
I
I've
have
just
a
seen him.
contact to him. I've talked to him on social media. I've met him at the Mickey Willis.
seen him.
You know Mickey Willis? No, he's
How do I know
the
that
film
person?
producer, Elevate Films. He did my first
Oh,
video.
yeah.
My first 2 videos, I met Mickey, and he's going to be on the show. But JP Sears, he wrote a book called the 12 and a half Steps to Enlightenment. Ultra spiritual, the 12 and a half steps to enlightenment. It is
His videos
a
are very
must
funny.
read. I have it in my teacher trainings that they have to read
that's
this
funny.
book.
That's
But
awesome.
he really makes a point where when you're serious, there's an attachment to your beliefs. And it's not in the Buddhist sense, non-attachment. Humor is what helps grease the wheels to non-attachment.
Absolutely.
And I believe that. And
Yeah.
I'm also, I'm a dad, and I practice all my material here at home first before I kind of bring it to my students. And so
My kids think I'm
daughter,
terrible.
My daughter and my wife were just, oh, that's a dad joke. And so I noticed that,
We love dad jokes.
well, some people who can appreciate the sophistication that's required for humor from a dad.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just delighted to have this extended conversation with you. Crystal, I know you're just chomping at the bit to kind of get involved here. So go ahead. I'm done.
I don't
Ask
even
away.
know what to say right now. There's so many points to touch on. I want to say I think the world would be. I'm imagining a world, as you're both speaking, of people who trust themselves, intuition, and who can laugh at themselves, the humor.
Yeah.
If we had a world of people that really were able to open up on those 2 senses, it would be a much better place.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. And the non-attachment thing too. I mean, there was a time in my life where I was really, really, I want to say religious. And I was serious about it. And I would get into debates about it. And I went to a retreat in Colorado, and I really got into it with this girl in a good way. And she really helped me to see things differently. And it broke every piece of the foundation that I was standing firm on. Everything that I thought I knew, that I understood about the universe, about the world, it broke, it shattered. And then at first it was hard.
Sure.
But then it was like, there's so much to discover. Now that I know nothing, what is out there for me to discover?
Well, that's a big thing in yoga, right? Because usually when we start, we get very identified with the system of yoga.
Right.
Right. And those systems have rules, and it's like a club, and it's kind of like a cult. And when you break away from that, it's like, your identity, it's you're sort of flailing out there.
Tell me about your process with that. Like my process, I think my story with Shandor.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, I don't know your story of how you arrived at what you teach now. Was there a break, a realization, or did it just kind of morph gradually over time?
Well, yeah, I would say it sort of morphed, but like when I first, so my first trip to India was in 1991, and I studied with Patabi Joyce, right? And I got really into Ashtanga yoga, as us very type A people do, and I had an incredible time there, right? I spent 4 months. I was pushed, though, very far, very fast. Did the entire primary series the first day. Within 2 weeks was adding second every day, and then the crazy back bends at the end. And, when I first went to India, like I said, I had practiced yoga, but I thought it was fun. I was like, oh, this is fun. Like doing a cool thing. And again, I still thought it was like a cool hippie thing. And then all these emotions started coming up, and I was like, whoa, like, what is this? And Luckily, I had people around me who were saying, no, that's actually the good part. Like, you're getting in. I remember saying, I don't know, it doesn't really feel that good. And anyway, fast forward a bit, the practical side, when I left Mysore, my back hurt. I was 22 years old. I had never had back pain in my life. And I was like, and then, Eddie, when I had met him, he had been an Iyengar yoga student and teacher. He was a certified Iyengar yoga teacher. And when he started practicing Ashtanga yoga, within a couple of years, they took his certificate away from him, even though he was like, whatever, it's on the wall and I did the work. But, they were all like that. And if you're doing Ashtanga yoga, you better not do Iyengar yoga if you're doing Iyengar yoga. So anyway, he was, we went after India to visit his dad, who was living in Italy. His dad's Italian. And Eddie said, oh, I have a friend who's a yoga teacher in Florence. That's where his dad lived. Her name's Gabriella Jubilaro. She's a very senior Iyengar teacher, studied with Doane Holloman. And let's go see her. Do you want to go to a class? And I was just hungry for anything. And I was like, oh, yeah, cool. So we went, and she, I was like, yeah, my back hurts a bit. And she took like one look at me, and she was like, no wonder your back hurts. You only bend in your lumbar spine. And I was like, what does that mean? And she was like, We spent a few weeks there staying with his dad, going to yoga with her. And I left that, and I was like, my back feels great. And I'm like, okay, I don't get this. And then I found out that both those systems had the same teacher. And I was like, wait a sec. Krishnamacharya was the same teacher, but it was like the Democrats and the Republicans, duking it out. And it really broke my heart. I was like, well, this doesn't make sense, because I like that system and I like that system, and I'm going to do them both. But I would be respectful. I'd go to India to study with Pattabhi Jois. I didn't bring any props. I'd do it his way, and then we'd go see Gabriella, try to go at least once a year and do her way, and not bring in, the Ashtanga. And I found them always to be incredibly complementary and not contradictory. I just didn't. And so, but the way that each system would talk about the other was not very yogic, and it was always really, it broke my heart, right? It really made me sad. And I remember as Guruji was getting older, to be certified in Ashtanga yoga, what you had to do was to have finished third series with Pattabhi Jois. That was it, right? This is before there were any trainings. If you finished second, you were authorized. So I was already authorized, and then I was learning third series with him, and I finished it. And he said, "You should get certified." And I said, "Okay, well, what do I do?" And we were in India, and I had my kids even, because we took the kids to India when they were little. So this is like 2005 maybe, and he said, well, you have to fill out this form, and you have to, pay X amount of money. And I was like, okay. So I'm in his office, and I'm filling out the form, all this, information. Then I flip the paper over, and on the back, in the middle of the paper, like outlined in black, it says, I promise to only practice and teach the Ashtanga yoga method as taught by Sri K. Pattabhi Jois in Mysore. I will teach or practice nothing else. And I looked at it, I was like, no, I can't sign this. And I remember he was like, what? Pattabhi Jois had come to our studio here in Maui. He had come when he was teaching. He blessed the studio. He saw the wall ropes. He saw the swings. He saw the props. And he sort of teasingly said to me, oh, this is all Eddie, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, it's all Eddie. But I said, I can't I can't do it. And he said, okay, and who cares? And so I didn't do it, and of course now I'm like, gosh, I kind of wish I had just done it, gotten the paper, but ethically I couldn't do it, because I'm like, I don't teach only that. And through the years, our teaching, had started to shift, because there was a big Ashtanga community here in Maui, and a lot of them had hurt themselves in Ashtanga yoga, and they stopped practicing yoga.
Right.
So we started teaching, and Eddie was bringing in, some of his Iyengar stuff. And we got all these Ashtanga yoga casualties. That's what I called them.
Right.
And they started being like, oh, we can still practice yoga if it's not the series. And we were like, yeah. So literally the classes here went from 6 days a week of Ashtanga to 5 days a week, and 1 day of like I don't even know what we called it, like a teacher's choice. It didn't even have a name yet. And then to 4 days and 2 days of the other stuff. And then, so like Maya Yoga, Maya is the name of the studio, by the way. Maya is also my daughter's name. We didn't even have a name for the studio. When she was about 6 months old, somebody said, you really need a name for the studio. We were like, no, we don't. And they were like, yeah, you do. I was holding Maya and we looked down at her and we're like, how about Maya Yoga? And last year was the 25th anniversary of the studio as being called Maya Yoga. And yeah, and so then fast forward, Pajabi Joyce passed away. And honestly, for me, it was very liberating because, the mantle, of course, passed to Sharat. And I was like, Sharat's a friend and a peer, really. I mean, he helped Guruji, but we're the same age. So it's awful that he passed away last year. But I was like, he's not my teacher. And it was liberating. I was like, okay, I loved Guruji and I had a great connection there, but I don't need to come back here and study. This is not my dharma. Right. And so I didn't have a teacher for years. And then I ended up meeting Arun. Do you know who that is? H.S. Arun. Yeah. So I started studying with him, and I love him because he basically teaches Iyengar yoga with heart. Yeah. He's not dogmatic. He doesn't make you feel bad. He uses humor all the time. And he's very creative with the work and the props and stuff. And I was like, oh, I would study with this person. So that's who I go back to study with and I bring here. But anyway, a couple of years ago, somebody said to me, one of my students, you really need to start thinking about calling what you need to own what you're calling. And I was like, I feel weird, because I made these DVDs and we called them Maya Yoga Vinyasa Fusion, which kind of always sounded to me like a Chinese restaurant or something. But
Maya Yoga Fusion.
I was like, what? But anyway, I felt really almost like that imposter syndrome thing where I was like, who am I to come up with the system? And I remember Kylie, I was just teaching at her studio this past weekend. She said to me, are you kidding me? Like, there's people who do yoga for like 6 months and come up with a system of yoga. You've got 30 plus years. You've been to India so many times. You've studied with these senior teachers, and what you teach is amazing. Like, just own it. Why aren't you just owning it? And it was really like I had to sit and meditate on that for a while, and it was a huge thing for me it's just in the last couple of years where I'm like, you know what? I teach Maya Yoga, and it draws on the two systems that I studied from very sincerely and very much in depth, Iyengar Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. But Maya means illusion. So it's never what you think it's going to be. And I really try to teach I teach to the people in front of me, right? And I like they're strong classes. I'm very focused on alignment. I use humor to set people at ease. I use the props. I try to meet people where they are and, kind of incorporate all the best parts. I like to say that I teach in the lineage of Krishnamacharya.
You do.
Yeah, so that
listening to this story, we never got to this level in Telluride. I went through the exact same process for years. I was trying to figure out a name, and I had done these DVDs under the brand Gravity and Grace because it was something that meant really those two terms were really synthesizing in a practice that had nothing to do, in a sense, with Iyengar yoga. It had nothing to do with shadow yoga. Mm-hmm. It just had to do the same realization you came to, that, okay, this is the byproduct of my dedication, my discipline, and my unique relationship with yoga. Then, writing my book, Gravity and Grace, in that, just when I signed the contract, I started to think about, well, what is it that my yoga produces in people? And this word levity kept showing up. And the thing that was beautiful about levity is it has a physical definition and it has a psychological definition. Physical, lightness, levity, buoyancy, etc. But on the humor side, it means lightness of heart.
Of course.
A sense of humor. So perfect. It was like, okay, done. And, it was just like epiphany, levity yoga. That's it. So, where am I going with this? The owning it that you talk about, owning it. Yeah. In my book, I did a research of the lineage of Krishnamacharya, and I came up with the same, sense of sadness that Here's this great man who taught to the individual, who
Exactly.
had teachers, senior teachers, take what they learned and create their own. So what does that imply? That it's innovative. Krishnamacharya, there was an article in Yoga Journal once about his life, and he had a reputation of being fierce. So,
Yeah.
But
They all
also he didn't hesitate with tweaking tradition to make yoga more accessible to his students.
And to women, he was like revolutionary. The yoga wasn't open to women. He said that women were the ones that should be practicing yoga. He said that women were more trustworthy.
Yeah.
He said that we manage households and families, and we need yoga, and that was revolutionary then.
Totally.
Right?
So then, looking at all these disciples, lineage of his teachers and students, I identified two things in common. And this is, I mentioned on a previous podcast about during the pandemic, we really have to focus on what we share. This division, this, two-party whatever craziness that it just divides people. How do we find commonality, and how do we move from commonality? And the two qualities that all these people had that came from the Krishnamacharya lineage, and when I look at Shandor, I look at his teacher Iyengar, I look, all in every stream, innovation, creativity, basically tweaking what they learned to create something through their own experience. And so that's when I fully stood into, okay, what I'm doing is consistent with the lineage. Yeah. And then I broke my back, and then breaking my back created a whole new repertoire.
How'd you break your back?
You want to know this story? I don't know if I've even shared it on this podcast yet.
You have.
I want to know.
I did share it. I'll share it again, Nicki, because in some ways this is me getting to get personal with you. Teaching yoga.
Shit. Sorry.
No.
You can say shit.
Okay. I have a terrible mouth, by the way.
No. This is so you'll.
as a
I think as a
disclaimer.
studio owner, you'll appreciate this. I had this studio that I was paying $100 a month rent, and it would hold up to 60 people. It was a big room.
Yeah.
Our first year was so successful, we were exhausted. I was teaching 7 classes a week and managing and writing for Yoga Journal, blah, blah, blah. So it's a cycle. I said to my business partner, Lynn, we have to close for the week between Christmas and New Year's because I need a break. And so she agreed. But we got all these messages from people saying, you can't close during Christmas. We got all these relatives that are coming to town. We need something to do with them, So
Right. And we need sanity while our relatives are there.
Totally. So they guilt trip us into having one special 2-hour class on the Wednesday night in between the weekends of the holidays, Christmas and New Year's. And Lynn and I decided we're going to co-teach. So she'll take the first half, I'll take the second half. It was Iyengar yoga in those days for us, so I would walk around making adjustments, she would lead, and then I would take the second half, I would teach, and she would walk around making adjustments. I don't know what she was thinking, but first Virasana, because every Iyengar class starts with Virasana, Supta Virasana sequence, she puts them at handstand at the wall. And I'm thinking...
First pose?
No, second pose after Virasana.
After Virasana.
First pose after Virasana.
Yeah.
What? But I'm just rolling with it, And so she does some downward facing dog warm up, but then it's kick up to the wall. We have 60 people lining the walls. We had solid walls all the way around. And I'm in one corner, and the caddy corner to that corner, there's this big athletic 6'4", 220, 230 pound man. And he's kicking up, and he made it up, but his arms were slightly bent. One leg was this direction, the other leg was that direction. And I'm just looking at him going, this does not look good. And right when I think that, his arms start to vibrate like this. And I know that that's just a the precursor to collapse. I'm sprinting across the center of this empty center of the room just as he's falling, and I'm lunging and grabbing his hips and intuitively just leaning him off to the side, and we hit the floor and I hear a bone break. Yeah. I thought it was his neck. It
Oh my
wasn't.
God.
It was my back. So that's the short version of the story.
And so how long did that take you out for?
Well, I mean, I was bedridden, not bedridden. I've shared this. I was immobile for about 2 months.
Yeah.
Where I was basically, because the surgeon that I went to, it wasn't a good thing. Like, he basically said, it'll take your pain away, but you're going to have all these side effects. And one of them could be nerve damage and, numbness.
Yikes.
And I just, I can't make that decision right now. I'm going to recuperate a little bit and then make the decision later. And luckily I had space in my life that I had people that could help run the studio. I had a situation where I was living alone with a roommate and I could take care of myself with my roommate's help. The only thing I could do, Nicki, was breathe. And the inhalation caused pain. The exhalation, I was out of pain. And that was interesting to me. So I just figured out intuitively to breathe short inhales and extremely long exhales. And literally within 4 months, I was out of pain. And after 2 months of just breathing, basically pranayama without really knowing what pranayama was, I started simple supported back bends. And that seemed to help strengthen my spine.
Yeah.
And
I'm a fan of back
within 12
bends.
months, I started doing forward bends again.
Wow.
And then it took another 1.5 years before I felt confident. So 2.5 year process. It's unusual, that anyone can have the luxury of 2.5 years of focus, uninterrupted focus to heal something. But it was just the timing, everything was perfect.
Well, there, yoga's a self-reliant healing system. You did that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's heavy. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So you have this system now, and
I do.
are you training teachers in that system?
I'm training teachers. I plan to, like, it's in the works for a my yoga certification. I mean, because off record, on record, we're all still, well, at least I'm still tied into Yoga Alliance, which I really think is ridiculous. I think it's
I'm so glad you're bringing
it's
this
a joke. I think it's a ridiculous joke. It's not even a certification, it's a registry. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got a funny story that happened less than a month ago. I'm turning 70 next year.
God bless. Looking great there, dude.
Thank you. You don't look too bad yourself.
55, still alive.
So I started to realize that I'm done paying dues to Yoga Line. So I call them up and I say, I luckily get someone on the line that has a heart, because usually you call Yoga Alliance and it's just someone reading a script.
Those aren't yogi. Exactly. They're not yogis working at Yoga Alliance.
No, this woman was fantastic. And I said, emeritus, do you have any emeritus registrations for people like myself where there's no more cost and I still carry my reputation with Yoga Alliance and you get the benefit of a senior teacher still belonging to. And so she goes, well, we don't, but, and this is off the record, but you can hear it. And everyone out there that's listening, you can hear it. So it's kind of on the record.
Now it is.
Just a little bit.
She said, I'm going to say it. You don't have to pay your dues for the next month until I figure out, I think she gave me a year free. She said, we're gonna hear this. We know who you are. You don't deserve to be treated this way. We're gonna create something. We'll get back to you. So in the moment, I'm doing the same thing that you're doing though. I've set up this Inner Teacher Academy, and we're gonna certify 100-hour trainings for the academy. Is it Yoga Alliance approved? No, because I'm not following the curriculum guidelines. So no, and plus I mean, almost all of it is online, except once there's one in-person requirement a year. And we've set up retreat centers, one in Austria, one in Iceland, one in
Oh,
New
cool.
Zealand, and one in California. So people from different parts of the world can come for a week and be face to face. And that's it.
Awesome.
So you can take that idea if you want, and you can
I
run
love
with
it. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah, no, because I'm very unimpressed with them. I get nothing from Yoga Alliance, and and I pay them a lot of money every year
Same.
because I'm always like, I want to stop, and people are like, yeah, but I didn't finish my 200, I didn't finish my 500. I'm like, oh my God. I have to come out and be like, okay, I'll stay on it for 2 more years, get it. I don't know. It just seems like I've talked to a handful of studios who are in the same boat. Like, oh, I stopped. I don't even do it. And I'm like, really? Because people still ask me for it. Like, is it Yoga Alliance certified? And I'm like, okay. But
You know what, though?
I would love a move away from that. Crystal?
Maybe someone has to come up with the new version of that is
Well,
not
no, they've
just
tried.
following.
They've tried because
Yeah.
you remember that guy, what's his name? Anna and is
Right.
it yeah.
And Heather Sanders was
Yeah.
a big part of that. That imploded.
Yeah, okay. Because
Yeah,
I had a
that
feeling I was like,
imploded.
oh, it sounds great, but it's amazing that no one has come up with an alternative that maybe has a little more substance to it. But yeah, no, Yoga Alliance dominates.
Yeah,
And it's not
I'm,
a certification.
I'm optimistic, and Nikki, if you want to reach out to me after this podcast, we can have a more personal conversation. I can give you the
Okay.
context, because I
Great.
think that
Great.
respected teachers like ourselves have a voice here, and
Great.
I think, you know, that what's that Bob Dylan song? Things are a changing.
Yeah, the times they are changing. Yeah, they
Yeah.
are.
Wow. Well,
Well,
oh, I do
No.
have a question and
Please.
ask Nikki.
Yeah.
How often do you speak with Michael Franti?
Aw, I talked to him about it like 3 weeks ago, actually. In fact, I'm doing a training in Bali at his retreat center at the end of September, which is kind of crazy because I have what I think is the most beautiful yoga studio in the world here on Maui. But the problem is it's very expensive for people to come to Maui. It's become like cost prohibitive because it's not a retreat center. I have like 2 cottages that people can rent that are always sold. But to come to Maui, to stay on Maui, to rent a car,
Right.
you know, the food, like that ends up costing people a lot. The training I haven't raised the price of my training in over 5 years. And so it's been the number one reason why people haven't come, and it's such a bummer. And so then I talked to Michael, I talked to Sarah, his wife, and they were like, we're building like a retreat center within our retreat center and a new yoga space. So I'm gonna do a training there this fall, and it's actually cheaper for people to come, more economical, right? If it's a financial thing, to come to Bali and do a 200-hour training with me than it is to come and do it on Maui. So, and Michael actually, so crazy, we've been friends for 20-something years, and his wife is having a baby. He's got a 36-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 5-year-old, and now he's having a baby. I know. Wow. Men can do those things. But anyway, so he's going to be there because he called me. He was like, hey, Sarah's due in June, and I know your training's in September, so I'm stoked. I'm going to be here when you're here, so I'm stoked about that. But
The reason I asked,
you want him on the show?
Yeah, I want him on the show, and all my contacts for him, because we had a really nice connection back in the Manduka days, and he was the unofficial ambassador for Manduka. He started all his programs pre-concert with a yoga class, and he wrote a beautiful praise or comments in my forward of my book. But I just don't have a way to get in touch with him anymore.
Oh, I'll connect you with him.
That'd be great, because we want to be beyond the yoga community with this platform, and having a musician like him, and especially his message and the fact that he's a yogi. He practices yoga. It would just be such a gift for me personally, for the listeners, to have someone like him. So we can talk more about that later.
Yeah, and I do have one more thing. I'm gonna I do want to plug my book. I actually wrote a book. I don't know if you remember we both had our books at that little bookstore at the Telluride thing. So it is a book that Eddie and I wrote together. And it's called First Steps on the Path of Yoga. So it's a great book for beginners, and it's become a really awesome reference for teachers. In fact, I use it in my trainings a lot now. So yeah, so it has our stories. It's got some anatomy. It's just like kind of a sort of general comprehensive book. And I'm starting to work on my next book, which is going to be about the Yoga Sutras, and it's called There's a Sutra for That. And it's going to be, like weaving, using those ancient teachings in modern times, because it's been a funny thing over the years with my girlfriends. We'll be, talking about something and they'll look at me and say, what's the sutra for that? Like this is going on. And I'll be like, oh, it's, Te Prati Prasavaheya Sukshmaha, or, Hayam Dukkhamanagatam, something like that. And so it's just been this funny thing. They're like, well, what's the sutra for that? And I was like, that's such a great title for a book. So,
Congratulations.
Been working on that. Yeah. So you know how intense it is to write a book and find the space and time.
One and done.
Yeah. I'm like, so I'm planning to be here for most of the summer. So I'm traveling a lot now and have been. So to hunker down this summer and be here and hopefully, get a little further on it at least.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah. Anyway.
Very cool.
It's been such a pleasure to catch up.
Pleasure's mine.
And yes. I'm intuitively, I've always felt like you and I were somehow on a path that has had many similar steps.
Sounds like it.
And the humor, I knew you were funny, but I didn't realize you were this
You didn't know I was this funny. It could have been a stand-up, and somebody the other day was like, what are you talking about? That's what you do. You just weave it into your classes. I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I tell people, I'm like, when I say something in class and they're all kind of quiet, I was like, that was a joke. And I really feel better about myself when you laugh at my jokes. I was like, I'm as insecure as all of you. Like, please laugh at my jokes. It makes me feel good about myself. Anyway, so.
That is funny. But you know what my line for that one is? That situation when I launch what I think is some of my best material and there's dead silence in the room.
Yeah.
You've had that one? And I'll let that silence kind of just stretch a little longer than I usually do. And I'll say, well, in case you guys were wondering, that was an attempt at humor. But I find my humor needs a sophisticated audience.
There you go. You're just not ready for my humor.
Exactly.
Do some more yoga and maybe it'll make sense.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine.
Thank
Have
you,
a wonderful,
Nicki.
safe trip. And stay in touch. When you have some space, reach out and I'll hook you up with Michael. And I'd love to hear more about the alternatives too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pleasure's mine.
Yeah. Thank you, Crystal, for facilitating.
Thank you too.
That's it for this episode. Be well and stay open to the teacher within. If you've enjoyed our time together, follow or subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming chats you don't want to miss.